Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ask the ESG Expert from CommUnique. My name is Gihan Hyde, and I'm the founder of CommUnique. We are the ESG strategy and communication advisory firm. We're based in the UK. And what we do is we help you to integrate environmental, social, and governance within your business model, communicate it effectively, train your employees to understand its importance, but most importantly, to also help you audit if it's the right initiatives for you and do they align with your purpose. If you're joining us for the first time, these weekly short live session is mainly to help you understand the fact that ESG is not difficult to integrate if you know where to start. And with me today is a very special guest. She is a personal friend of mine, and this is Sheryl Owen. She's the ESG lead for buildings and cities within Mott MacDonald's. Sorry. Hi, Sheryl.
Hi, thank you for having me. So happy to be here.
Thank you for coming, because I've just realized that transportation, agriculture, and buildings are the three sectors that are the most pollutant sectors currently affecting our environment. And specifically buildings, they equate for 40% of the global carbon emission. Did I get my stats right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you think about buildings, especially when it comes to existing buildings, right? So a lot of our clients, they have a lot of existing assets. And one of the things that really is at the forefront of the conversation is what we call stranded assets, meaning that this building is so old, is so inefficient that it doesn't align with the direction of policy and regulations, and therefore it's at risk of being a stranded asset.
Okay, so before we go into the technicalities of this, for those of us who don't know what McDonald's does, can you introduce us to your company?
Yeah, Mott MacDonald is an engineering consulting company. We work from rail systems to highways, but I specifically focus on our buildings and city sector, helping a lot of the real estate assets align with their ESG goals and understand what can happen with regards to their specific assets that we're working on, as well as their overall portfolio.
So, in layman terms, what does that mean?
It means that we help you achieve your sustainability goals wherever you are in your journey, especially when it comes to your buildings.
See, I like that. I like that. Now that is good. Okay, so tell us more. So, if I have a building, how would you help me? Where would you start the process? And how would you help me to report on it as well?
Yeah, so for a while, when it came to understanding what does sustainability mean for the built environment, it was predominantly benchmarking schemes. So that is, for example, LEED or
Yes.
BREEAM or WELL, right? So we were just comparing or trying to understand what we were doing within our spaces in order to reduce energy. But now, while we are looking towards ESG, we need to understand how does this fit into the bigger picture of our corporate goals, right? Because your building asset is only one part of your overall greenhouse gas emissions. So that's where we are trying to understand where are you in your journey? Do you have specific commitments that you have essentially tried to align with or that you want to align with? And
Mhm.
then we try to understand where does this specific asset or this building fit into your overarching sustainability goals, especially, apology. So, this is a sustainability feature here, which is making sure that we reduce our energy consumption whenever you don't move in the space, the
Oh,
light
I
will
love
go
that.
off.
So, okay, for those of you if you're joining us just now and you see Cheryl moving back and forth, it's basically she's trying her best to save the planet. Okay.
This
Okay.
is
So
what we
I mean,
call occupancy sensors. But yeah, so when we go into trying to understand where you are on your journey. Maybe you're committed to science-based targets, for example, where when you have specific reduction goals around energy consumption, you need to understand how your building is going to align with that direction of your decarbonization plan. So we come in and help you develop that. And then also, one of the biggest conversations that we're constantly having is around supply chain engagement, because we want to understand our scope 3 emissions. So that's where we come in and we help our clients with their goals and aligning it with their specific assets.
If we look at you as the organization, as Mott MacDonald, how
Mhm.
are you living and breathing your ESG goals? How did you even decide what commitments are you going to commit to?
A lot of it really is understanding the market direction, right? And knowing what is the right thing to do, right? So when it comes to definition of zero carbon, a lot of our work that we do is very infrastructure heavy, right? Buildings is one thing, but we also work on roads and highways. So there's one thing that we do, which is the PAS 2060 and the PAS 2080, which essentially is a guideline for achieving carbon neutrality. And that's really where our journey started. And then with regards to buildings, with the movement of EU regulation, specifically the EU taxonomy,
Mm.
um, that played a bigger role in trying to understand how do our building assets fit into that larger picture, and reporting that a lot of our clients will have to do.
And do you help your clients to report on it as well?
We do help them with regards to reporting, specifically when it comes to your past 2060 or past 2080 commitments.
Okay, and
So around your carbon neutrality.
uh, so I'm interested. So what do you think would be the biggest challenges for an organization to transform the building? Because I'm assuming not all organizations can own the building itself. So they have to convince the lease
Yeah.
holder or the landlord that they want to be, sustainable. How does this work?
Oh, that's a really good question. And it's always as I get more RFPs, to be honest, this is something that they are requesting from us to help them with. So this is something called a green lease. This is what we coined the term. So a green lease essentially is outlining what are the sustainability goals and commitments that you as an organization, whether you're a tenant, are trying to achieve. But the next step really is to have an open conversation with the landlord, and to make sure that you're also on the same page about your greenhouse gas emissions and the decarbonization plan that you have in place. So that's something that I'm actually working with a client on, specifically with developing a decarbonization plan that aligns with their specific goals, which in this case is the science-based targets, but then having a conversation with the landlord to understand when within the time frame of their lease do they need to make energy upgrades in order to stay in alignment with what they're trying to achieve for their corporate goals.
Interesting. And do you, when you're doing that, do you work closely with the communications department of your clients to try and demystify what you're doing to them, just to bring the employees on board? I mean, how do you actually work at all with the comms department?
We don't oftentimes work with the comms department, but we do hold focus groups with the employees, because like the human I guess interventions that
Mm.
are play a very big role in how your building is going to perform. So
Yeah.
we can try and design out as much things as possible, right? Any kind of human error, but to an extent, when it comes to the operations of our space, humans are a very big part of it. So there's training for your facility management team, there is training for your employees, and if there's ways to actually gamify, like gamification of of the space in order
Yeah.
to help with your sustainability performance goals, that goes a long way with employees as well, and actually puts sustainability at its forefront. And of course, all of that plays a big role in how it's communicated in order for there to be an opportunity for individuals to actually see sustainability and for it to be visible.
It's interesting you say this. So we just worked with a client of ours, and they wanted to basically bring their sustainability effort to life within
Mm-hmm.
their office space. So we're working very closely at the moment with the facility management team. And then we're also working with the employees. So we've created a hackathon with the employees whereby they need to come up with initiatives to embed within the offices. And the ideas that the employees have come up with are mind blowing. And we then took it a step further. What we also did is we created a competition, like you said, gamification between the different offices globally,
Mm-hmm.
whereby the sustainability champions got together, created a case study for the initiatives that they've suggested, and then presented it to the judges. And if the idea is viable, whoever wins the prize, basically, they're in charge of embedding all of these initiatives in all of the offices globally.
Wow.
Yeah, of course, there's some localization that needs to happen. So, for example, some regions recycling is not applicable. So we had to slightly refocus the initiatives.
Yeah.
But one of the initiatives that they came up with is reducing the. I mean, it's such a simple thing. Simple thing. They've reduced the sizes of the food bowls, because you know how when we're hungry we just stuff our dishes with food, but then we don't end up eating a lot of it and there'll be a
Yeah.
lot of food waste. So what they came up with, they was like, no, reduce the sizes, put the salad bar at the entrance, so you're helping us to see the first thing is a salad, and then we remember, oh, we need to be healthy as individuals. Get the salad, get a couple of other things, and that's it, and there'll be zero waste. And guess what, they've reduced the food waste by 30%, Cheryl.
I
Can
bet.
you-
I
yeah.
bet. I love that. And I would, and then it's so important because what another message of that is really putting healthy food, making that the easy option, right? So it not only focuses on waste reduction, and I'm assuming they're also doing composting, and there's even opportunities for you to even calculate what are the greenhouse gas emissions associated with composting as opposed to actually taking the waste to a landfill, which can, you can use that as part of your, ESG calculations, your greenhouse gas calculations specifically. But then there's a social, the S and ESG side, where we're focusing on the health and well-being of the individuals by making sure that fruits and vegetables are the easy option.
Well, exactly. But to your point, what we've done with the S part, we're now helping them to partner with local charities, food
Mhm.
charities, so that all of the extra food that has not been touched, and hygienic, of course, and clean, would go to them.
Yeah.
And that way they completely reduced to an extent the 30%, which is, in my opinion, we wouldn't have got to this level if the employees were not involved and if the idea wasn't generated from the employees.
Yeah, I think employees have a bigger role than they possibly even think sometimes, because when I go into meetings with stakeholders or decision makers, they oftentimes are like, "What did the employees say? What did they say was important to them?" And honestly, when the more out there or out of the box ideas actually get implemented is because of what the employee said was important to them. So I'm currently working on a project where we're even thinking about putting an apiary on the terrace areas. This is a complete fit out. So beekeeping essentially, and it to help with essentially the biodiversity of the region, right? So biodiversity is something that is also a very hot topic in the market, and understanding how does that contribute to your overall corporate sustainability goals. And there's something called a TNFD, which is focusing on nature related disclosures. So a lot of clients are like, what does this look like specifically within the built environment, right? So doing beekeeping, but then also doing urban gardens is something that the employee said, oh yeah, we love that idea. And they're now taking it seriously to move forward. And this is where we come in. It allows us to be be creative in what does that look like specifically in the real estate sector.
One of our clients is Suez Waste Management.
Mm,
And one of the ways that they contributed to increase of biodiversity, and again, it was an employee-led initiative, they reused the unused tires, the garbage bins tires, and they filled it with the compost, and they absolutely flooded all of their sites with how do you call that, like plants,
mm,
plant pots, but they used tires. And if you now go into their sites, it's beautiful because it was initiated by the employees. It was, taken care of it by the employees. So biodiversity actually is an interesting thing, aspect, which I think not a lot of individuals think about. So far, we're so hooked up on climate change and environmental and social, but biodiversity, in my opinion, is not yet that there. Are you seeing any change? I mean, you've mentioned the TNFD.
mm.
How do people even know about it?
Yeah, so oftentimes, what happens is we take a look at our clients' websites and we see, oh, they have reference to wanting to address biodiversity, but oftentimes they don't know what that looks like specifically, outside of it being a green roof, right?
Yeah.
And if you are a tenant, oftentimes you don't have a lot of ability to change what's on the roof. That tends to be something that the landlord has to do. So it's again an open conversation that you would have with the landlord to see what are they open to having a green roof onto an existing structure. But if you are lucky enough to actually have a terrace area, there is opportunity for you to do a urban garden or to do beekeeping on terrace areas. So there was an office in New York City that actually did that, and the employees are actually growing their own vegetables. And every month during the summer, they actually have a feast where they go and pick the food that they grew, and they eat
No.
it together. And they take care of the bees, which I was like, oh, you guys are going all in. You're not hiring a company, like the employees are taking care of the beehive. It's a small beehive that they have on their terrace.
Gosh, if you're allergic to bees, you are doomed in
You
that
are
office.
doomed.
We're absolutely doomed. We have, first of all, I have a shout out to a very good friend of mine, Anima. Hi, Anima. Anima has a question for you, Cheryl.
Hmm.
She says, in Singapore, we see more buildings which are literally green. The plants are growing on the walls, including the tall buildings, the grass roofs, which also cools the buildings down. And definitely it emits less energy for air cons. Are you seeing this anywhere else other than Singapore?
I think Singapore is at the epitome of doing like essentially having the plants be a part and integrated within the building from the ground up. Um, I think it's a harder sell, at least in the markets that I've seen in the States and also in Europe, of like even integrating green walls, mainly from a maintenance standpoint. But we do try to push it. But I think Singapore is really at the top of it when it comes to the biodiversity conversation.
I agree. No, Singapore is in a different level.
Yeah.
Completely different level. Okay, I have a question regarding the LEED and the BEAM certifications. Okay, I know for a fact it's a rigid certification for buildings. You have a lot. You have the platinum status, you have the gold, I think, or something silver. Anyways, there are different tiers of
Yep.
how, uh, how would you follow the certification process. My clients in the Middle East are finding it, they want to do it, but they're finding it extremely difficult to embed all of the aspect of leads. Are you seeing the same elsewhere? I mean, what is leads? Let's start with that. Give us an example of the different steps that you can take to become lead certificate, adherent or compliant, for example.
Yeah, LEED stands for leadership in energy and environmental design. So when
Yeah.
we are doing a LEED assessment, right, I always tell people that LEED was created to be better than the current building regulations, right? So when we're looking at energy consumption, water consumption, the location of the building to make sure that people have access to amenities and we're promoting walkability of the space. It also focuses on the indoor environmental quality, like ventilation rates, acoustics, doing a daylight analysis, views calculations, all of that, and even the materials, right? We want to make sure that we have healthy materials within our spaces that we're in. I always try to tell people, like, we like going into a new car and the new car smell that everyone is like, "Ooh, this smells so good." It's not good for you, right? Because that is off gassing, and that's just all of the chemicals that are off gassing. Like when you go into a freshly painted room, and sometimes you get a headache, right? That's your body saying that that stuff is not good for you. So we go through and we make sure that the materials that you're selecting as part of your building actually are, healthier, or what we call low VOC. So we just don't want it off gassing a lot, essentially. So that's what LEED is focusing on. I know in some markets it is difficult to get LEED, mainly because it's very stringent when it comes to the energy baseline requirements. And oftentimes what we have to do is to prove that either an existing building regulation is as stringent or more stringent than lean, and it can be very difficult in certain markets to demonstrate that, unfortunately. So in those cases, maybe what we have seen is an uptick in BREEAM, as well as other rating systems that are open to essentially the local building regulations themselves. But LEED has been very stringent in making sure that it follows what we call ASHRAE 90.1 requirements.
Gosh, it sounds very complicated.
It can be, but that's what we're here for. And oftentimes what we do is we do a pre-assessment initially, right? If a client is like, I don't know if I really want to dive into this, I don't know what this means for my project, it's important to do, or to make sure that your sustainability consultant actually does a pre-assessment for you. It's essentially just outlining what are the risks, what is the level of achievement that you can get potentially based on the project's current design, and then also just outlining what are the expectations, so that you can just know for yourself if this is a direction that you really want to go down, or if there's a different alternative that would be better suited for your project.
Yeah, alternative is definitely the key
Yeah.
word here, because, for example, one of the things that the LEED certification is, or rating, is asking you to do is to have enough bicycle racks
Hmm.
in your offices. And I remember very clearly the client saying, "But we're in the Middle East. It is super hot. Our country is not geared for bicycles. Then how are we going to do this? Because purely if we don't do this, we're going to lose the ranking. We're not going to be platinum, for example." And I say, well, yeah, we'll have to just, we have to work around it somehow. So we're still trying to figure out what to do. Um,
Oftentimes with LEED, it's about communicating that you're still meeting the intent of the requirement. So oftentimes they're willing to give you an exemption if you can demonstrate that you're meeting the intent of the credit. So it's about promoting exercise. Is there an alternative way that you can still demonstrate the intent of the requirement, even if it just doesn't make sense for your building itself? And in those cases, I've seen them actually accept the exemptions, but you do have to make like a pretty compelling argument.
we have another question for you. Which countries or states have strong laws which require building owners and tenants to declare emissions and zero carbon plans? And what would you suggest we should have in place? That's a big question, Anima.
It's a very big question, and I can only talk um, to New York City.
Okay.
So specifically, we have something called a local law 97. Just so everyone knows, I'm not in New York City at the moment. I'm in London, but um, New York City has a local law 97. So essentially, it starts putting a price on carbon, starting in 2030. A lot of the existing buildings and landlords over a certain square footage, building square footage will need to disclose what is their energy consumption and carbon emissions. And they have to demonstrate that they are below the threshold that's outlined in Local Law 97. And then they subsequently have targets for 2050 as well. If you're a landlord and your building does not meet those requirements, you get penalized, financially penalized, if you don't hit those targets. So there isn't a zero carbon plan per se, but this is one of the components that New York City has implemented in order for them to demonstrate that they are reducing their emissions or trying to reduce their emissions. You do have California as well, where they are really looking at all electric, and really promoting renewable energy. Again, that's very climate focused, right? You have a lot of sun in California, and they focus a lot on what we call demand response. So the way they do their energy modeling is very different. So I would say both California and New York City, that's what's really happening. And you do have the states in between that are doing some level of sustainability requirements,
Mhm.
but may not be as stringent as those two locations. Um, I do know in Canada they were upgrading their regulations to require an equivalent of passive house. So passive house is really focusing on the building envelope. So for people who don't know, I'm
Okay.
pretty sure we've all been in buildings where we feel drafty, right? It's too cold, even though I have the heat on, and all of my energy is actually going through my windows and my doors because it's not sealed properly. That means that I'm driving up my energy bills.
Yeah.
And as a result, I'm also driving up my scope 2 emissions associated with my greenhouse gas emissions. So
Mhm.
Passive House is another rating system of the many,
Yeah.
that really is just focusing on how tight your building envelope is. And Scotland is also promoting that, as well, where they're pushing Passive House as a requirement. So you do see the direction of everything focusing on energy consumption,
Mhm.
in order to reduce it, but then also your greenhouse gas emissions. Um, and then you do have the EU regulations, EU taxonomy, which is, although it's not necessarily saying that you have to be net zero, it is putting it to the forefront of companies that have to report to it, to understand how do their assets align with these requirements. So that was a big question. Hopefully, I answered it to an extent, but I can only talk about the markets that I that I know, to but hopefully it answered it.
Well, what I do, I mean, yes, but we also need to keep in mind that the buildings, so the 40% of
Mhm.
of carbon emission is coming from buildings. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean houses is not included in that 40%.
Right.
So I love what Airbnb is doing at the moment. So Airbnb is launching, they've already launched it, whereby um, they're helping their hosts to get acquainted to sustainability
Mhm.
through energy efficiency. So they're providing all of the hosts that work with Airbnb with practical steps to follow to reduce their energy consumption. So, for example, if you go to Airbnb's website, there is a part for hosts, and in it is there is parts where they are giving you an example of, did you know that your appliances, if you leave them on all the time, that's consuming your energy? And we're going through a living crisis at the moment. So if you want to reduce your energy bill, take those off. I didn't know, for example, that purely because my mobile phone charger is on the thing, on the socket, I'm still consuming energy. Didn't know that. So we also need to be mindful when we're talking about buildings. We're not just meaning office building, we're also meaning us as homeowners, home tenants as well.
Yeah, a big conversation that's happening around residential buildings is this this idea around how do you educate homeowners but retrofitting these existing buildings, right? Retrofitting is not cheap,
Yeah.
and homeowners don't have the the financial ability compared to a commercial landlord.
Yeah.
So this is something that a lot of cities are trying to grapple with and understand what they can do around policy and green finance in order to help promote the retrofits of existing buildings. So this can be multifamily buildings, your smaller
Mm.
residential buildings, or even existing commercial buildings as well. Um, the existing buildings is a really difficult and conversation to have, especially when it comes to maybe a window retrofit that would need to be redone. That's expensive, and it's something that we do have to tackle if we want to meet our net zero goals.
Absolutely. And we're also governed by the council rules.
Hmm.
We can't just walk up one day and put solar panels in a house, for example. Apparently, I have to get the permission of my neighbors. I have to get planning permission. I mean, talk about making it difficult
Yeah.
for me to live sustainable. But anyways, we have come to an end. I've learned a lot. So thank you, Sheryl, for your time. And please, everyone, if you do have any questions, Sheryl, how do we get in touch with you if we have more questions?
Find me on LinkedIn, and I'm sure that also when you have your link on LinkedIn for the people to rewatch, you feel free to tag me, and that's the best way to get in touch with me.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Take care and see you next week.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thank you, everyone. Bye.